Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to our very first Students for Students lecture, where we'll be looking at the magnificent Canada. And I'm very proud to say that our students, our Canadian students, worked on a beautiful presentation, and they will be a teacher today. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor. Do appreciate that. Hello, classmates. Thank you all for joining us today. Me and my fellow Canadians have put together this beautiful guide for all of you to truly embrace and embody the beauty of our beautiful nation of Canada. So, without further ado, please grab your passports and join us with a trip across the Atlantic so we can discover all the beautiful things that make Canada so great. And so first off, why not start off with just a few interesting facts just to set the tone a little bit. First and foremost, Canada is the second biggest country in the world by landmass, behind only Russia. And just to give you guys some perspective on how big Canada is, we do have something that is very close to home to you guys all that we've made a comparison with, and that is the continent of Europe. So we have this beautiful graphic that depicts how big Canada is just for scale. Compared to yours truly, Europe. And as you can see, it engulfs most of the countries of Europe and also touches parts of North Africa. So yeah, it is pretty massive of a country. Second off, there's 6 different time zones across the country. That's without a doubt, just because of how big it is. It could be sometimes a logistical issue, but we do work our way around it. And third, we have over 2 million lakes in Canada, and these are all freshwater lakes. So we do have the most fresh water in our country. Yes, and just to let you guys know, another thing is, if we were to actually remove these 2 million lakes, our country would drop to the 4th largest in the world, just because they compose 9% of the country. Also, 8 out of 10 Canadians live within 100 kilometers of the Canada-US border. Unfortunately, it's just inevitable. We can't escape our neighbors of the South. They are a good partner to have. We do a lot of trade with them, and they are the biggest importer of Canadian products. They do import most of our Canadian products. And just to show you guys, if we look at this green line that spans across the country, 80% of Canadians actually live south of that line. So we are very close to our neighbors of the South. Also, there's 2 official recognized languages in Canada. Those are French and English. They're widely spoken across the country, and the government is obligated to translate any document in both of those languages. And finally, 1 of 5 Canadians are actually foreign-born as of 2016. We are a very diverse country, and we love that. We love the diversity. It really makes Canada what it is. There's tastes of everything. All 4 corners of the world are all put into our country. And so moving on now, we'll talk about some national symbols, and where else to start but our beautiful Canadian flag. The red is to represent the St. George's Cross. The white is the French royal emblem that was used by King Charles VII. And finally, the 11-point maple leaf. This has been a symbol of ours since the 1800s. It's been a symbol for generations, even before Canada was its own country. So we wanted to represent that by putting it on our flag also. And now another national symbol that honestly, I was surprised that there's this opinion across Europe that I've noticed since being here, is that a lot attribute the bear to Canada, but this is not true. Bears are not as prominent. Our national animal is actually the beaver. The beaver is what is widely represented, and you do see a lot more than bears. And so now we'll move on to some authentic Canadian meals also. First and foremost, poutine. Poutine is probably the most widespread. It was invented in a bar in 1967 in Quebec, and it's just thick cut fries, fresh cheese curds, and gravy. And now you find it all across Canada, and there's different variations of it, and it is delicious. It is a delight that must be tried in Canada. And moving on, maple syrup, of course. 80% of the world's maple syrup is supplied from Canada, and that's essentially just maple sap that's evaporated from the water, and then it's very, very sweet, and you can make all types of things. And one thing that is delicious is maple taffy, and that's just maple syrup put on snow, and then it hardens, and it's essentially just a lollipop that is very sweet and savory. And finally, beaver tails. This is close to home for me just because it is from my city, Ottawa, It's a hand-stretched piece of dough that you deep fry and then add all types of sugary condiments on, and it's super good on a cold winter day. It's just hot and it just melts in your mouth. So yeah.
Next, we'll talk a little bit more about the geography of Canada. Did you know that Canada is actually made up of 10 provinces and 3 territories, spanning from west to east? For the provinces, we have British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, which is where they speak French, New Brunswick, PEI, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And if that wasn't enough names for you, we also have 3 other territories, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. The exciting part about our country is that each of these different provinces and territories have their own capitals, their very own provincial laws, and most importantly, their own culture, which is really special to us Canadians. In addition, the city of Ottawa is the capital of Canada and is home to our parliament buildings, which creates our federal laws. Canada is actually the second largest country in the world, as mentioned before, and as of this past July, we hit around 40 million people in population. Did you know that Canada actually borders 3 different oceans? That's right, we have Pacific, Arctic, and the Atlantic Ocean as well. But geography is also important to look at the Netherlands. If you can see, we'll use an arrow to help you out, that's where the Netherlands would sit on Canada, so it's quite a bit different in size. The area of Canada sits just below 10 million square kilometers, whereas the Netherlands is just below 42,000, making the Netherlands only fit 0.41% of Canada's land mass. Despite our difference in size, though, the Canadian and Dutch have a very historical and important relationship. Did you know that the Canadian forces actually led the liberation of the Netherlands in World War II? And we gave refuge to the Dutch royal family, which actually, Princess Margaret of the Netherlands was born in Ottawa Civic Hospital in our country's capital. In order to commemorate this important and historical relationship, Canada actually celebrates Dutch Heritage Day on May 5th. Which is the same day that in the Netherlands, they celebrate Liberation Day. The Canadian Tulip Festival is one of the most popular festivals in our country's capital, and it's done as a thank you from Queen Juliana of the Netherlands, who throughout her reign gifted tulips to the Netherlands as a thank you for her help during the war. Therefore, the city of Ottawa and the government ends up hosting a festival every May in the springtime to display the thousands of tulips we were gifted for visitors and citizens. And as someone who actually lives in the capital and was able to experience this, it's definitely something to see. It's absolutely gorgeous. Finally, did you know that actually 3% of Canada's population is Dutch, due to after the war, so many Dutch families seeking refuge in our country? And most importantly, we'll discuss the cultural elements of the Dutch and Canadian people. How are we similar? How are we not? Well, if we use Hofstede's cultural dimensions, we can see that we're actually pretty similar in a lot of categories, and majorly differ only on 2, which are individualism and motivation towards achievement. Looking at individualism, the Netherlands, the Dutch people are pretty hard to beat with a score of 100, but that doesn't mean Canadians are not an also individualistic country. But we're a little bit more loosely knit than the Dutch, as our constant use of sorry can prove to you. Next, just to look at motivation towards achievement, Canadians always strive to attain the highest possible standards, mostly in our professional lives, which does create a little bit of conflict as we cost our personal lives for this. However, in the Netherlands, a work-life balance is very important to a lot of citizens, and as a Canadian university student myself, I know this all too well.
Thank you, Maggie, for that insightful overview of Canada's rich history and geography. Next, I'll be sharing a little bit about Canada's economic landscape, trade relationships, key exports, and most importantly, our good old Canadian money. Firstly, Canadian bills are quite interesting, with all of our banknotes made out of polymer for enhanced security features. Our bills range from the $5 bill to the $100 bill and feature former prime ministers, civil rights activists, and royalty like Queen Elizabeth II. The bills are also very colorful, ranging from blue, purple, green, red, and brown. And there are some cool features of our bills, including the fact that we have frosted maple leaves that you can look through, and you can see a cool picture through that. We also have some very unique coins, ranging from the 5 cent to the 25 cent, and our 2 most important coins, the loonie and the toonie, which might sound odd to foreigners, but it just means the $1 coin and the $2 coin. Next, we'll move on to Canada's top export countries by goods, which include the United States, followed by China, Japan, UK, and Mexico, with the United States being the largest export country than all of these other countries combined. Our top exports in Canada include energy products such as our oil industry in Alberta, minerals, motor vehicle parts, and agriculture. The Netherlands is one of Canada's most important European trading partners, and it is Canada's 11th largest trading partner. Key exports to the Netherlands include precious stones and metals, notably diamonds, machinery, and pharmaceutical products. In 2017, Canada and the EU signed a trade agreement called CETA, and that resulted in greater trade relations between the European Union and Canada. And in 2022, Canada and Netherlands bilateral good trades totaled over $9 billion, an increase of more than 82% from pre-CETA trade.
Perfect. So moving on to Canada's strengths, a few of these have already been mentioned, but Canada does have a lot of strengths, both internally and when considering its relations with other countries. So to start, Canada has a very high quality of life. It's generally regarded as safe, and we do have a reputation of being very friendly people, especially when compared to our American counterparts. As mentioned, we have established trade deals with many countries, such as the US, Mexico, and Canada trade agreement, as well as CETA, which Nantesh has just mentioned. We also have abundant resources in energy, agricultural, and mineral, and Canada is very diverse as a result of immigration. So it's known as a melting pot, so a very multicultural country with many different cultures. It's also the third most stable economy in the world. So getting onto some differences between Canada and the Netherlands, Canada is a mostly continental climate and it varies by region, and this is simply due to its large land mass, whereas the Netherlands has a moderate maritime or oceanic climate, once again just due to its area. So Canada has two official languages, which are English and French, and the Netherlands technically has one official language, which is Dutch, but I just looked it up, and English is also considered an official language in certain areas of the Netherlands, but held to like a lower standard than Dutch. And the Netherlands does have a high percentage of English speakers, which is 90 to 93%. So coming from Canada, you can get along very easily, as you don't really need to know Dutch to live here. So Canada has a federal parliamentary republic, a constitutional monarchy, and the Netherlands simply has the parliamentary constitutional monarchy. And then looking at the average life expectancy between Canada and the Netherlands, it's pretty similar at 81.75 years compared to 81.41 years. So just looking at the climate comparison as well, as you can see in the summer, the temperature is very similar between Canada and the Netherlands, and it gets a lot more varied when it comes to the daily temperatures in the winter. So getting into a few grocery items, these are just a few things I've noticed since coming here and trying to do my shopping. So in Canada, we regularly keep our eggs in the refrigerator, and they're also found in the refrigerators at the grocery store. Whereas coming here, a lot of us were struggling to find eggs because we didn't realize that they would be on the shelves instead. We also have bagged milk in a few places in Canada, specifically Ontario. So the milk comes in bags, which you then pour into a carton to use, whereas here the milk comes in cartons, and a lot of non-dairy milk is stored on shelves, once again, instead of the refrigerator. So a big difference we've also noticed is in terms of alcohol. So in Canada, you have to buy all types of alcohol from licensed government-run liquor stores, whereas in the Netherlands, you can buy more soft alcohol like wine and what we call coolers, which can be found at grocery stores, and then once again, the hard liquor at specific licensed stores as well. So a main difference we've noticed as well is obviously cycling. So in Canada, cycling is definitely not as prominent as it is in the Netherlands, where cycling is the second most common mode of transportation. So 36% of Dutch people use it to travel on a typical day, compared to only 16% of Canadians who cycle at least once a week. So it's clearly not the main form of travel. In fact, it's almost considered dangerous to bike in most places in Canada because the proper infrastructure is not in place to ensure the safety of the bikers. As a result, we also have a legal requirement that you have to wear a helmet when you're riding a bike in Canada. And this is certainly not the case in the Netherlands, where everyone just kind of rides around without one. And there are also more bikes than people in the Netherlands, which is once again not the case in Canada.
Next up, we have the particularities of Canadian Standard English that is present throughout Canada, or parts of Canada. First off, you might know this, we say the very unique A. We say A in the middle of a phrase, we can say A at the end of a phrase. A assures the other person that you are still listening. For example, today is nice weather, eh? Here I am asking you a question while still making sure that you're still listening to me and wanting you to agree with me. Next up, we also say sorry in a very, very weird way. I don't say it like this, I say sorry, but some parts of Canada, most of the population might say sorry when apologizing for an event. We over-apologize, and in fact, in the parliament, if you say sorry, you cannot get any bad things done against you because it's like our national right. It's a whole thing. Next up, we say the letter Z, or Z, as you would say in Canada, a different way. Not much to it, we still pronounce it the same way. In Canadian French, which I speak, and they speak in New Brunswick, as well in Quebec, we have all the French accents that you can imagine, and one that's notable is in the classic phrase et voilà, you can find the I there on your screen, in voilà. Original words that we have in Canada are toque, which is actually your toque or your hat that you wear during winter, the loonie, which is our $1 coin, and the toonie, which is our $2 coin. We have different slang varying by province. If you're in British Columbia and you have a secondary home, some might call it a cottage, they call it a cabin. A lot of Canadians have a secondary home, actually, where I'm from in Quebec, in Ontario as well, and in BC, that is more in the country and that is cheaper, that you go to on the weekends to enjoy the nature and the weather. Ontario has a lot of different little dialects and unique words, like the word chirpin. If you are giving some slack to another person, you're kind of teasing them at their expense, you might be chirping them a little bit. Chirping can also be used at a hockey game when you're chirping the opponent, the rivals. You can also be cheesed in Ontario, which is unique to Ontario. Cheesed means somebody is angry. You could say, I am cheesed right now, and you're a little bit angry. Also, Ontario has a very interesting pronunciation of the word Toronto. Toronto, the biggest city in Canada, is pronounced widely Toronto across Canada. In Quebec, we have all kinds of different words. A lot of it in the slang region is taken from Haitian patois, but we have also some slang. So let's say blonde means girlfriend. Chum means boyfriend, even though in regular French, in French from France or French from Belgium, these words mean absolutely nothing. In the Maritimes, people speak in a Canadian-Irish accent. This is very particular and came to me as a culture shock in my university in Quebec when I spoke to somebody from PEI, Prince Edward Island, for the first time in my life. I was very surprised to find out that my friend, my new friend, was from Canada after speaking in a total Irish accent. I was blown away. So what do we miss about our home and native land? For me, I miss hockey. I've been playing hockey since I'm a kid. I play hockey with my friends on the weekend. I love hockey. It is a very interesting sport. It's a weird sport to understand, but it's very, very fun once you get a grasp of it and you stand still on your two skates. I also miss very dearly our #1 best product ever. You can see on the screen is maple syrup. I actually bought this on Amazon.nl for €8 and I put it on absolutely everything. I put it on my toast, I put it on my Dutch pancakes, I put it on my American pancaken that I buy at Albert Heijn. The list goes on. And finally, we have some Canadian stereotypes. So many people, I have met an American person who literally thought that Canadians lived in igloos. You can sell that dream and people may believe it or not. The classic stereotype is that all Canadians live in igloos, they ride their moose to school, and we have polar bears roaming about. We're just like the US in the most part, and none of that is pretty much true. We do have a lot of lumberjacks, though, in the west of Canada. We have a lot of little Canadian particularities when it comes to saying yes or no. No, yeah means yes, a definite yes. Yeah, no means no. An easy way to really understand this is the last word means the word that you're actually going to say. Yeah, no, for sure means definitely. I'm definitely going to be there. Yeah, no, yeah means I'm sorry, but unfortunately the answer is yes. No, yeah, no, since the no is at the end there, oh no, you've got nothing to worry about. You're good.
Alrighty, so moving on to some made in Canada items. Canadians are very proud of the celebrities, the sports, the inventions, the people that make it mainstream, especially being a little smaller than our neighbors to the south in America. It's nice to see Canadians have success. So first off, we'll go into sports that were invented in Canada. So the first one being ice hockey. That might be a little bit obvious given how much we talk about hockey, but the first organized game was in Montreal in 1875 and is one of the only big four sports leagues in the United States and Canada to feature more than one Canadian team outside of Toronto. But this one might be a bit of a surprise. Basketball was also invented by a Canadian. So a Canadian phys ed teacher named James Naismith invented the game, and the NBA, National Basketball Association Hall of Fame, is now named after him. Some other fun Canadian inventions. Insulin is a big medical discovery that many Canadians are very proud of. The process of extracting it was actually invented by 3 Canadians. Next up, the paint roller might not be quite as big of a deal globally, but still significant. That was invented in Toronto in 1940. Next up, the California roll, which I'm sure many of us have tried in our day. While many claims have been made that I invented it, no, I invented it, it's generally agreed upon that a Japanese-Canadian chef invented the California roll in Vancouver in 1974 by accident. And then finally, maybe the most useful on an everyday basis is the egg carton, which is also invented by a Canadian in 1911. So even though they're not in the fridge here in the Netherlands, we still recognize it, and it's a Canadian invention. So next up are celebrities. So going into some music artists from Canada. We love our Canadian musicians. We actually love them so much that there's a regulation in place that Canadian radio stations play 35% of songs by Canadian artists. So if you think you've heard a lot of Drake, we might have heard just a bit more. So Drake is from Toronto, Ontario, as he features in his music. Justin Bieber is also Canadian. He has a hit song called Sorry. So that might have been inspired by the Canadian politeness, who's to say. And a few others include Avril Lavigne, The Weeknd, and Celine Dion. So moving on, Canada also turns out a lot of actors and actresses, like it's nobody's business. Ryan Reynolds and Ryan Gosling, the 2 Ryans from British Columbia, are some of the most famous, as well as Seth Rogen, Rachel McAdams, Jim Carrey, Michael Cera, Keanu Reeves, Kobe Smulders, and lastly, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who actually has dual citizenship between America and Canada, and even played in our Canadian Football League for a short period of time. Next up, I'll go through some landmarks that are very significant in Canada. So first things first, Niagara Falls is a landmark on the Canadian-American border and is one of the top 5 biggest waterfalls in the world. It's actually one of Canada's biggest tourist attractions, so much so that the entire town of Niagara Falls, Ontario is built around tourists. So there's a Hershey's Museum, there's a Ripley's Museum, there's a lot to do outside of the falls, and it's developed to kind of spend the day and take your time in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Next up is the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. It's one of Canada's biggest architectural wonders. It's the first museum that's located outside of our capital city of Ottawa and the first ever human rights museum in our country, Canada. And as you can tell by the photo credit, this museum is located about 20 minutes from mine and Taya's homes in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So we're especially proud of that. Next up is Whistler, which is a mountain town just north of Vancouver on the west coast of Canada. It attracts many skiers and snowboarders from around the world. If you're familiar with Whistler, it might be because it was heavily featured in the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, which were hosted partially in Whistler. So a lot of slopes. If you're a skier, definitely recommend checking it out. And then finally, probably the most recognizable Canadian landmark is the CN Tower, which is Canada's tallest structure. It was actually the tallest structure in the world until 2007, but we don't like to talk about that. We still consider it very tall. It's 553 meters, so just above half a kilometer. So if you're totally inspired to live the Canadian life now that you've heard this presentation, you can get a little taste of Canada in Amsterdam. So first things first, if you're like me, sometimes you're a little lazy, you don't want to cook every day. There's a restaurant that serves our national dish, which is poutine, like Camille mentioned earlier. So while Canadian food can be a bit tough to track down, Ellis Gourmet Burger serves poutine as a side dish. So although for a more authentic experience, you might want to pick off the spring onions they serve with it, just trust us on that one. But if you're ever craving it, we definitely recommend checking it out. Next up, if you're really keen and want to go to the Albert Heijn right after this, you can get a couple of Canadian items. So first up is McCain Potatoes. So McCain is actually a Canadian company that's headquartered in Ontario, and they're very popular for hash browns in Canada, and it looks like here as well. And they also serve frozen fries, so that's a great way to start your homemade poutine should you try that out. And then secondly is Smarties. So they were actually developed in the UK but became extremely popular in Canada. It's one of our most popular candies, especially around Halloween. And in the United States, they actually call it by a different name. So in Canada, we really cling to the Smarties name and really made it our own. So that's an honorary Canadian item. And then finally, we do have some Canadian founded businesses that operate in Amsterdam. So first things first, Lululemon is a Canadian company founded in Vancouver. If you notice our teammate Zach's nice quarter zip, that is from Lululemon. So if you need outfit inspiration, there he is. Secondly, we have Canada Goose, which is a very popular jacket brand. So every time we see someone with Canada Goose on their shoulder, we get reminded of home. That was founded in Toronto in 1957, and there's one location here in Amsterdam. And then finally, IMAX was actually a Canadian invention. So if you're ever in the mood to see a movie, you can hop over to the movie theater by the Johan Cruyff Arena and check out IMAX, which is Canadian made. So we hope this gave you a good idea of our home country, Canada. Thank you so much for listening, for those in class as well as those tuned in on YouTube. And yeah, thank you again for your time. So I'll throw it to Camille, and he's just going to run us through a quick quiz to wrap up the class.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, so we just have a quick quiz that was set up for you guys just to test your knowledge and see if you learned something new about our country. So we'll just flow through the questions and feel free to answer either through the chat or however you feel like it. So we'll start off with question number 1. How many time zones are there in Canada? Is it A4, B5, C6, or D7? And if you were thinking to yourself that the answer is C, then you are correct. It is six time zones across the country. Now for question 2, how many Canadians are foreign born? And if you answered 1 and 5, you would be correct. The answer is A. Almost 20% of Canadians are foreign born as of 2016. And question 3, what is the Canadian word for a $1 coin? Is it A, the loonie, B, the goosey, C, the snowy, or D, the mapler? And that would be A, the loonie, as was mentioned by Mantej. And finally, question number 4, how tall is the CN Tower? And it would be just over half a kilometer, 553 meters, B. And finally, we have a quick bonus question for you guys. Which of these statements is true? Is it A, Canada has the longest freshwater beach in the world? B, the lowest recorded temperature in Canada was so cold as Mars? C, Winnie the Pooh is named after Winnipeg, the city where Chris and Tay are from? Or D, the largest T-Rex skeleton ever discovered was found in Canada? And this was a trick question. Actually, all of these statements are true. And so, yeah, thank you for participating if you did. And thank you again for your attention, everyone. And we hope one day to see you guys all in Canada so we could experience the beautiful country all together. So thank you.
What a wonderful job they did. Very proud of you, and yeah, excellent. I can imagine that some of our classmates have questions that they always wanted to ask a Canadian. And although we didn't practice this would be a perfect chance. And also I want to compliment on the quiz because I thought my phone was exploding. I think, what's this noise? But it was all the answers in Teams chat that came in. Lovely job. If anybody has a question, then yeah, talk to our appreciated Canadian panelists.
Yeah, I'm free to answer anything.
I would have a question. I was just wondering, because I've spent time in both Canada and the US, and I've heard different stories about the relationship between Canadians and Americans. And I was just wondering what your all takes are on how you view those people. And it can be honest and harsh, because I've heard all the stories already, but I was just interested.
Yeah, it is being recorded, going to be published on YouTube.
Yeah, I would say that Canadians think they're just a little bit better than Americans. I mean, it's like asking a Swede if they're better than Finnish. They're just gonna say we're just a little better. And that's because of some political things. It's also because we're just polite and more, grateful. We have that kind of in our system. So spiritually, we think we're just like a little elitist in that spiritual realm. And I don't know, we're just more kind. You hear some really bad news out of the US, usually a lot of violence, a lot of things going on there. And in Canada, it's not as bad. It's really not as bad. And it's peaceful and it's free.
Yeah.
And just
to add on to that, thank you, Ben, for the question. From like the naked eye, like a Canadian and an American, you guys would think it's the same thing. Like we do get that a lot when we're here in the Netherlands, that people do think we are Americans. We do, like, politically, we are very like well connected, and we do share multiple like free trade agreements with the US. Now, like when it comes to the fine details of things, once you do hear a Canadian speak compared to an American, we are a little bit different. Like we do use different jargon. Also, you would say ours sounds a little bit more in a softer way. And again, like Zach said, you do experience it. Like I do go to the US often, and it is a little bit different when it comes to things that we are more accustomed to in Canada, as like holding the door for someone, for waiting them to go by. You don't really see that in the US. Like, and also a lot of thank you and excessive sorries. You definitely do not see that in the US. So I hope that answered your question. If
100, I'll add on to you. I have an American friend, and we went to order a sandwich in Amsterdam. My American friend says, "I'll have," to the person across the counter. I say, "May I have, please?" So it's like just in that little difference in phrase, there is a completely different like philosophy.
Gotcha. Thanks. Appreciate it.
I invite for the next question.
Yeah, I think I maybe have a question because I was just wondering. I was this summer in Toronto, and I heard a lot of Canadian people say like, yeah, mostly in Toronto, it's more like a bit of the Europe from like North America. Do you also see it like that? That's more a bit European, or do you think that's a completely different thing?
So I can answer that question. I'm from Toronto, and I would say it's not very European at all. In fact, it's more Americanized. It's probably our most Americanized city. I would say if you're looking for a more European city in Canada, there's none better than Montreal or Quebec City, which are one of my favorite cities, to be quite frank.
And I'm from Montreal, and I can attest to you that the architecture, the old port in Montreal, and then you go to Quebec, the infrastructure, the fortifications, the history, very, very much aligned with Europe and European style of just not only culture, but architecture and infrastructure as well.
Super, thank you so much.
I also have a question.
Don't be shy.
No, 1 second. It was just a bit laggy on my side. Okay, so you've come to the Netherlands and you're exploring Europe as well, to my understanding. You've experienced culture shocks here, but are there things that you think when you go back, you'll experience a reverse culture shock and things that you're like, oh, I wish we had that there, or things that you're like, ooh, we can bring that back to Canada?
I think I have one that I've been thinking about the last few days, because 2 days ago I got my first bike here in the Netherlands, and I've actually been quite enjoying even just going out for a bike ride, and I feel safe on my bike and it's relaxing, whereas in Canada it's quite scary to go for a bike ride. It's not safe, so I feel like if anything, when I go back, I'm going to be sad to not be able to take my bike out.
Yeah, in a similar fashion, Maggie, I've been really getting used to walking everywhere. And in Canada, outside of the main few cities, we have so much space. Like we mentioned, it's second biggest country in landmass, but we don't have that many people. So construction and the construction of our cities tends to kind of spread out rather than kind of congesting right in the center. So I know at least the city where Tay and I are from, as well as a lot of other cities in Canada, they're not walkable cities. You need either a vehicle or you get on the bus to get from one end to the other. So being able to walk and go to Central and see so many sites all within walking distance is definitely something different for us. And I think we'll miss the walkability of a lot of the European cities.
Yeah, and just adding on to that as well, I'm honestly really impressed at how like efficient all the transportation and like the metro systems are here. Because yeah, especially for me and Chris, like, and the majority of Canada, the only really main mode of transportation is a car. So here, where you can just hop on a metro, is not the same as in Canada at all. And even we like have public transportation systems, but they're always delayed. There's really a lot of issues with them, and it's always just waiting out in the cold with like -40 temperature for like a bus that's always delayed. So it's a big difference with that as well.
Nee, then no, yeah, no. I want to thank our speakers today. I really loved it. I know you put a lot of work into it, and it paid off. Great job. And I am sure that a lot of us, there was a big crowd. Try not to have more students watching than Einar, Chris, or me, please, for the next time. But yeah, it was really nice, and I'm sure that a lot of people, you managed to make them fall a little bit in love with the Canadian culture and country. And I like to close by saying, let's all meet in Canada fairly soon. But until then, maybe first see you in class.